Your article on the Fugitive Slave Act and the Fugitive Slave laws and how they are literally being used to restrict rights today. Absolutely phenomenal. Talk with us about the connection between how the slaveocracy is literally determining reproductive justice and other areas of civil rights law today.
So in Missouri, they're trying to pass an amendment that says, because Missouri has one of the more restrictive abortion laws in the country. But yes. Missouri is very close to Illinois, which has a more kind of, shall we say, 21st century view of like whether or not women are people. Illinois says yes. And so women have been going from Missouri to Illinois to get health care. So the amendment in Missouri says that that anybody can sue citizens, abortion providers outside Missouri who aid or abet, that's the exact language, aid or abet women from Missouri getting an abortion out of state, right? Idaho has a law that makes it illegal to leave Idaho to get gender affirming health care for trans children. It's now illegal in Idaho to leave the state to get care, and if you do, you can go back to Ohio. You can be tried and convicted, folks. These laws that came out this week in 2022 are using the exact same language as the 1850s Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act provided for the recapture and reselling of slaves who had made it all the way to freedom back to the South, back to their masters without a fair trial. So you could literally be just suspected of being a slave and be captured by a bounty hunter, by a private bounty hunter, and sent back to the South. The private bounty hunters, that's something that Texas is doing right now with abortion providers, right? And the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 also punished whites who helped. If you helped an escaped slave, according to the act, you could also be fined. You wouldn't get, nothing really bad would happen to you, but you would get, fined. It could be a bad day. You could lose, one of your yachts or whatever the hell you have in 1850. And the Fugitive Slave Act, that just goes back, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, that just goes back to Article 4, Section 2 of the trash Constitution, which had a fugitive slave provision right in the actual document, which said that basically any slave that got to freedom could be recaptured and taken back to a condition of servitude. Again, to your earlier question, if you had white allies who were against slavery, you certainly don't need the fugitive slave clause in the Constitution to make it work, do you? Do you, white friends? So the language that they're using today in Missouri and today in Ohio is the same constitutional language that they used 250 years ago to recapture escaped slaves. Now they're just trying to recapture women. But the thought process is the same. And if people, that's why I say, like, if people don't understand, you said it so well when you were talking about the importance of your audience understanding history. If you don't understand what they've done, then you can't understand what they're doing.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I want to parse down what you said a little bit just to make sure that we are all clear. That original language in the Constitution, can you clarify for us, was that an amendment to the Constitution, or was that fugitive slave provision baked into the original Constitution trash that it was?
That's the original document right there, right? It was in the one that was ratified in 1787, right next to the 3/5 clause. Which counted Black people as 3/5 of a person, which, by the way, let's remember, the 3/5 clause was there to make their captors more politically powerful in Congress, right? Counting Black people as 3/5 of a person gave more representation to their captors in Congress. How disgusting is that? Again, this is what they wrote down. It's really bad. It was some of this language, the 3/5 clause and the fugitive slave clause, was excised with the 13th Amendment's prohibition on slavery. So that was a good amendment. But even the amendments that we talk about that allegedly perfected or fixed this document, who got to write those?
Right. That's right.
Exclusively white men, right? Even when you purport to be giving Black people freedom, you don't actually ask any Black people what that freedom looks like. I bet if you would ask 1865 Black people what kind of amendments needed to go into the Constitution. Yes, they probably would have said, slavery should be prohibited. Finally, that'd be great. And they probably would have said, yes, voting and equal protection. But they might have also said, and some housing rights, please. Right, and perhaps a constitutional declaration for that we are entitled to equal pay for equal work, please. Perhaps that would have been in part of the amendments in 1865 if you had actually asked Black people, but they didn't. So even the amendments that purport to give freedom were written by white men for white men along the lines that white men were capable of thinking. The amendments have to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures. There has never been in American history a state legislature that was majority minority controlled, which means white people had the power to ratify or not ratify every single amendment. There's only been one state legislature that's been majority woman controlled. That was in 2018, folks, in Nevada. Wow. So arguably women have never had a chance to ratify any of the amendments pertaining to their rights. It's not good, right? It's not how you would design the system if you were starting today.
Right. So in everything that you said, there are lightning, like there's firecrackers popping off in my head right now. So when you think about that census, or I'm sorry, the 3/5 clause, which, as you noted, gave additional power to slaveholding states. It's so interesting to me that we also see this week that I'm a census guru. I love census. I'm all things census, because now I realize how that 3/5 clause really was tied into the first census count. It was the first time we saw the racial manipulation of data to determine the artificial distribution of political power and resources. But it's curious to me that as we're thinking about how history relates to today, that just this week we hear that the Trump administration was so effective at manipulating the census that the undercount for Black and brown people was enormous enough that now there are questions about how any of us can have any confidence in the validity of the census as it stands. So again, y'all, past is present. And that fugitive slave clause, that y'all remember 12 Years a Slave? Like we've seen how this has sort of been depicted in popular media. You did not actually have to be a formerly enslaved person to be caught up in the Fugitive Slave Act. So I always like to point that out, because a lot of times we act like the class struggle in our community is new. And I like to remind people, Samuel Northup, like these were people who were not formally enslaved, who were being kidnapped for being Black because their skin became equitable with the idea of a slave status in this society. So it didn't matter if you were technically free or you could technically leave from West Philly and move to Bel Air, right? It didn't matter if you could do those things. You were still, by virtue of being in Black skin, suspected of being a slave status occupant, which meant you could then be kidnapped and taken into enslavement. And
it'd be like if somebody kidnapped me from Harvard Law School and made me do a rap battle to save my life, right? Like that wouldn't be fair. Like I lose, right? I lose to Eminem. That's not right.
Oh man. And so I think we have to just be clear that one of the reasons we are not allowed to really digest a lot of how the Constitution was formed, trash as it is, and how the subsequent institutions that were then erected to support it, trash as they are. I'm going to just extend it. Those are my words, not yours. Feel free to push back. But when you think about the fact that we now have entire wholesale institutions, the judiciary, for example, that is not only an outgrowth of the formulation of this country, but they are also charged with interpreting and divining the law. And so interpreting what that trash Constitution says. And we find that repeatedly, the Supreme Court, God bless Ketanji Brown Jackson, may she forever be well and covered by the blood of the ancestors in Jesus. But we have seen that this institution, which is supposed to be occupied by the greatest legal thinkers in our land, they basically uphold the trash Constitution at every single opportunity. Our current legislators do what they can to pass laws that mimic the very failings that were born out of the trash Constitution. I feel as though, Elie, if I take your argument to its logical conclusion, the whole damn government is a big old pack of trash. And that's a legal opinion. What are you saying about that?
Well, it's certainly meant to uphold white supremacy. Like it's designed, it's almost like the government is working as intended, once you realize that the intention is to uphold white supremacy, right? You bring up the Supreme Court, great place to start, right? So again, one of the pushbacks to my book has been, interestingly, that, well, actually the Constitution lives and evolves and it keeps up with the times, which is an interesting point, because that's actually a super liberal point. It's conservatives that says it don't. So like, if now conservatives want to come back at me and be like, oh, the Constitution is a living document, I'm like, welcome to the party. That's great. We got
here's your red, black, and green flag. Join the Afro wearers over to the left.
I'll get your kente cloth is in the mail, my friend. But anyway, the Supreme Court claims that it is the final arbiter on what is or is not constitutional. Interestingly enough, as you well know, that's not in the Constitution. Like, the Constitution does not say that the Supreme Court gets to decide what laws are constitutional or not, which of course it shouldn't, because that's stupid, right? Like, there's no other, I think India is maybe the one example that I can think of another another industrialized rich country that has a high court as overpowered as ours. That's not how they do it in Canada. They don't have unelected judges in Canada overruling laws passed by the legislature and signed by the prime minister. That's not how it works. It's ridiculous, but we do it that way, right? The Supreme Court says in 1803, gave itself the power to veto laws passed by Congress and signed by the president. Okay, if the Supreme Court wants to be the final arbiter on what is and is not constitutional, then it becomes relevant that we've had 115 Supreme Court justices in American history, and 108 of them have been white men. Right? Then that becomes a problem, because once again, it means that in the entirety of American history, Black people and women have not had a full and equal say in interpreting the laws that we are then expected to live under. The Supreme Court has a veto on the popularly elected branches. And there have been 5 women in American history that have gotten to have a say, 6 maybe, if we get Ketanji Brown Jackson on. There have been 2 Black people in American history that had a say. And I'm being super generous by saying 2.
You are. Because I was going to say, well, wait, she's not on the bench yet. We got Thurgood. Oh, right.
I'm being super generous by saying 2. There's never been a Latina Supreme Court justice. There's never been an Asian Supreme Court justice.
Well, we've got Sonia Sotomayor now.
There's only been 1 Latino Supreme Court justice. There's never been an Asian Supreme Court justice. There's been no openly gay Supreme Court justices. I assume that we've had a couple over the, just because of the law of averages, but there's never been an openly LGBTQ person on the Supreme Court. All the people I just mentioned, by the way, we're the people whose rights are under attack, right? Because again, the white men, 108 of them that have been able to rule, their rights are never in play. Their rights are never in question. Their rights are never in danger of being ignored for 100 years. Nobody's saying maybe white people in Georgia shouldn't be allowed to vote. That's never on the table, right? But it's only white men that get to decide what the Constitution requires or doesn't require. And again, that's a huge problem if you think about it from kind of constructing a polity from first principles. The other, I think, huge problem with the Supreme Court is that we have these lifetime tenures. Like, the Constitution mandates that the Supreme Court justices and all federal judges serve while in good behavior. That has been interpreted to mean for life. Now, in the context of like 1787, when these people didn't have like Robitussin or soap, like, I get it, right? You're gonna die, so, right? A lifetime tenure when you get appointed at 40 is like another like 8 years, right? And then you're probably gonna be like, right now, people, thanks to the wonders of Pfizer, these people are living for a much longer period of time. So if you appoint a justice at 48 years old, as Amy Coney Barrett was when she was appointed to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, if she stays on the court for as long as Ginsburg stayed on, when Ginsburg didn't leave till she was 83, we're talking about a woman who's about to wield power for 35 years. That's ridiculous for a democracy to have a single person or a single group of people wield political, social, legal power for 30, 40 years. That's not how a democracy is supposed to work. So again, it's a kind of obvious flaw with our foundational document that should be changed, and would be changed if they let non-white people get involved in constructing it.